Nothing says Valentine's Day quite like rounding up 24 teenagers from all over post-apocalyptic America and forcing them to fight to the death under the worst conditions imaginable. It might not be Valentine's Day when I post this video, or even when you watch this video or listen to it, but today I will be taking you back to about a decade or so from posting this video to the Hunger Games. Do you remember the Hunger Games? Briefly, it was a dystopian novel featuring Panem, the country that spans across USA territory, Mexico, and a little bit of Canada in the nondescript post-apocalyptic future. The Hunger Games within the context of this world is an annual sports event that rounds up 24 teenagers from the 12 districts of Panem and forces them to fight to the death in an arena until the last man is standing. This video is the second one in my series of A Cowboy Reads, in which I, a cowboy, read one novel every month in the year 2023 and come up on my soapbox here on YouTube and talk about my thoughts. For this month, I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, the same author who wrote the Hunger Games trilogy of books. Now, this book, The Ballad, is a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, and it shows President Coriolanus Snow, who is the one of the main villains in the Hunger Games trilogy. Well, it features Snow when he was about 18 years old during the 10th annual Hunger Games. To start, Snow is a high school student in this book who is about to graduate from the most prestigious high school in the capital and go on to a university with the eventual goal of rising through the political ranks and becoming president of Panem. We know that eventually he becomes president if you remember the Hunger Games trilogy, which takes place, begins to take place about 64 years after the Ballad book. But this book also serves as an origin story of sorts for the Hunger Games and how this sporting event came to be as we saw it in the Hunger Games trilogy. Recall how the games were presented in the movies. It was treated as the biggest event of the year. You had teams of stylists who poured their souls out to create costumes that mirrored the economies of each district, which the chosen teens would wear during a grand opening ceremony kicking off the games. Sponsors could pay money to send their favorite tribute supplies to keep it alive for another day during the games. And of course, these sponsors were various wealthy citizens in the capital. And then you have the victors, which are the tributes or the teenagers who win the games. The victors get to move into the victors' village of their district, which is a nicer home and a nicer neighborhood for themselves and their family. And everyone in each of the districts was forced to watch every bloody detail of the games. But it wasn't always this way. Of all of these ideas of presenting the games had to come from somewhere. And many of them came from Coriolanus Snow after the 10th Hunger Games. Before I get started here, I just wanted to give some content warnings. I'm going to be talking about violence as it pertains to the Hunger Games, but this is considered a young adult novel, so it's not overly graphic violence. It's not like in The Family. It's not that graphic. I will also be mentioning cannibalism several times in this video and making references to character deaths. If you're familiar with the Hunger Games, you know that there's a lot of violence involved with these teenagers and also other characters who aren't chosen to participate in the games, and that many of these characters have died in some pretty gruesome ways. With that, let's get into it. First thing I want to talk about after getting the preamble out of the way is that I want to talk about the narrative style of this book. As I said, this book is the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, written by Suzanne Collins and published in 2020. The point of view narrative style is noticeably different than the original Hunger Games trilogy, in that the trilogy is written in the first person style from Katniss's, the main character's, point of view. The first person style of writing is a type of narrative point of view that puts you in the mind of one of the characters. The writing style is reflective of the character's thoughts, so you read the character's own narration and interpretation of the events. This type of writing style or narrative style, it's not really a writing style in my opinion, but this type of style uses the word I a lot to reference to the main character rather than the character's name, as if the character was speaking directly to the reader. In contrast, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is written in the third person limited style, which in my opinion is a little bit easier to stomach. The third person style of narration is perhaps the most familiar to you, listener, in that all characters are referred to by their names, and the word I is not used in a narration. You could think of it as viewing the story through the lens of a camera. You see that the characters say what they say or act as they act. It's not simply just one of those characters telling you what is happening in the story or telling you what they think and so on. Furthermore, the limited style of the third person narration frames the story's events from the perspective of the main character, Coriolanus Snow. With this style, Snow does not directly describe what is happening or what he thinks or about another character event in the story. There's no mention of the word I here, just remember that. However, the narration is written in such a way to allow the reader to gain insight into Snow's feelings or thoughts without having this character speak directly to the reader. And in the third person limited view, we are still confined to viewing the story through the lens of Snow. And so we miss out on understanding the thoughts and feelings of other characters directly through the narration. We understand other characters through Snow's impression of them, but I think it's a little bit more accurate to say we understand Snow's interpretation of those other characters rather than the true nature of those characters. But why am I mentioning this? Well, in my opinion, the third person narration is a hell of a lot easier to stomach than the first person. That's probably because my own mind prefers to view stories through the lens of a camera rather than just have one of the characters tell me what happens. So your mileage may vary. Alright, so that's enough about narrative styles. Your mileage may vary with them. Next, I'll talk a little bit about the history behind the Hunger Games, why they exist, and how they motivate characters in the story and how they affected the world around them. So I'll be talking a little bit about the setting and the Great War that caused the Hunger Games to exist and put the events into motion that eventually led up to Katniss's story. As I said before, Snow was involved with the 10th annual Hunger Games when he's 18 years old. If you do the math, you'll find that the Hunger Games started as a concept when Snow was 8 years old. And it comes off the back of a terrible civil war waged between, District 13 and the other rebels of the other districts and the capital. Alright, so briefly, Panem is a dystopian country that exists in a post-apocalyptic world where the sea levels have risen and have swallowed up all of Florida, other places in the southeast area of the United States, and other territories. However, we don't have an official map of Panem, but we do have some pretty damn good interpretations. You can do a little bit of Google search to figure out, at least to get an idea what Panem looks like. My favorite interpretation is that Panem stretches all across what remains of the United States, from East Coast to West Coast, and includes some land in formerly Canada and some land in formerly Mexico. Well, I can't say what formerly United States, but you get the idea. In short, Panem is simply one huge country broken up into 13 districts and one teeny tiny capital somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. It's estimated that the capital could exist in present-day Wyoming, of all places. I say Wyoming of all places because now in the present day, Wyoming is actually I think it's the least populated state in America in terms of just the sheer number of people who live there. For starters, Wyoming doesn't even have 1 million people living within its borders, and yet you have several million people living in say, New York City, for example. But anyway, moving on. Each of the 13 districts specialize in a certain type of economy. Fishing, mining, agriculture, cattle, electrical power, technology, wheat, nuclear power, ammunitions, jewelry and fine linens, and so on. But most of the profits and materials are reaped by the capital, which creates this stark wealth gap. The capital sits on top of all the riches of Panem, while most of the districts, especially the districts higher in number, are poor and destitute. As you can imagine, this bred unhappy feelings among the people living in the districts against the capital, and an uprising broke out where rebels in several districts actively fought against the capital's rule. This is known as the First Rebellion. This is the start of the civil war between the capital and its districts. District 13, which specialized in nuclear power and granite as its economical output, led the uprising against the capital, which eventually ended in District 13 becoming an independent state and the other 12 districts being beaten into submission. District 13 was then wiped off the map via bombs, and the Hunger Games were implemented to continually punish the other 12 districts for their role in the rebellion. That's a little bit of the history and the origin of the Hunger Games. When the war broke out, Snow and his classmates were about 5 years old, and when it ended, they were 8 years old. Snow's father, Coriolanus Snow, was a general in said war and died by a rebel bullet months after Coriolanus' mother died from childbirth. Coriolanus Snow is an important figure in this book. He's only mentioned and doesn't appear or say a line of dialogue himself, but when he was in the academy as a teenager, he had a buddy named Casca Highbottom. Both of these chums studied under Dr. Volumnia Gall, a former obstetrician who now specialized in creating all manner of mutant horrors. Remember that one girl, Tigress, in the Mockingjay book and movies who looked like a tiger? Well, Dr. Gall would then take people, amputate their limbs, and fashion on the limbs of animals and create hybrid mutant creatures. She also created neon-colored snakes to be used as a tool for the Hunger Games, as well as other mutants used for the war. So anyway, Dr. Gall taught both Coriolanus Snow and Highbottom and gave them an assignment. She asked them to create a punishment so cruel and severe for the capital's war enemies that the enemies will never forget how they wronged the capital. So Coriolanus and Highbottom go out drinking, and while drunk, they bullshit around, throwing ideas at the wall for this project until Highbottom gives a general layout for the Hunger Games. Now, Highbottom didn't intend to submit his blueprint for the Hunger Games to Dr. Gall as an assignment, but the next morning, Highbottom was sleeping off the alcohol, and Coriolanus Snow wrote up a proposal of Highbottom's idea, the Hunger Games, and submitted it to Dr. Gall anyway. Sometime later, Dr. Gall had the Hunger Games idea submitted to the government of Panem, and it was approved. Then she introduced to Panem Casca Highbottom as the creator of the Hunger Games. And this was the cause of the falling out between Casca and Crassius. And in my opinion, the reason why Casca later became addicted to morphling, which is a powerful painkiller that makes one numb to all emotions, was to try to appease the guilt that he might have felt from being the creator of the Hunger Games and thus associated with the decades and almost a century of killing later. See, now, Casca never wanted something like the Hunger Games to happen. He was drunk, he shared his ideas with Crassius as an inside joke between friends, and then Crassius betrayed him and submitted the proposal. So just imagine that. Casca Highbottom came up with the idea of the Hunger Games and is the guy responsible for the sporting event that brutally killed off, hundreds of children over the years and tore apart families all over Panem. Well, shit, if I was in that position, yeah, I'd get high off of morphling whenever I could. But despite Coriolanus' young age during the war, the aftermath of the war has affected the Snow family tremendously. For one, the Snow family got most of their wealth by investing in nuclear energy provided by District 13. However, when District 13 was bombed off the map, the Snow family fortune went with it. So the Snows were on hard times but tried desperately not to show it to their peers. And this meant that Coriolanus, at 18 years old, was a master at crafting a certain image about himself and his family. No matter how bleak his family situation got, he always knew how to put on a mask and charm his way throughout school, to rub shoulders with the right people, all to attain power. To the point where many people didn't realize that it was all ruse. And Coriolanus was putting on an act. And one thing that kind of stood out to me, when we think about the Hunger Games, we typically think about all those teenagers who were rounded up and put into an arena, given weapons and all this shit. But there's also a lot of other games going around, and we saw this in the trilogy too, where we had the more social, political game with Hey Mitch going out and trying to win sponsors over for Katniss. Even PETA, the other, Katniss's buddy tribute from District 12, even PETA kind of caught on to the games and was trying to put on another act to win the favor. Well, here we see Coriolanus also playing the whole social, political game by trying to rub shoulders with people or elbows and charm them, make some friends, network, all sociopathic shit, and climb his way up the political and social ladder to attain power and to attain wealth, to make sure that the Snow family name rises to its peak prominence and carries on. The financial woes became a sort of a motivational factor for Coriolanus when the 10th Hunger Games began. At this time, Dr. Gall, the head game maker, created the mentoring program and selected only the top performing students at the academy to mentor the chosen tributes for the 10th annual Hunger Games. Furthermore, the very wealthy Plinth family donated a scholarship to the mentor whose tribute became the victor in the 10th Hunger Games. This scholarship was a free ride to the university, which is the capital's most prestigious college. And without this scholarship, Coriolanus had absolutely no chance of attending that university, and thus no chance at climbing the political ranks and becoming president. The Snow family fortune was fading fast, and at this point, the capital also introduced a tax on penthouses, and it's kind of like a wealth tax, which the Snows just absolutely could not afford. So you know what kind of game this creates, right? Well, this is really no different than betting on a horse in a race. So now you have Coriolanus, who's going to do whatever he can to do to win these games and secure his own future. But there's still a small problem. Casca Highbottom, who is now the dean of the academy, announced which students will be paired with which tributes. And Coriolanus' name was read dead last to be paired with the girl from District 12. It was understood that certain districts produced tributes that had a higher chance of winning the games, but District 12 was not among them. In fact, District 12 had the absolute worst chances to win. And it was understood that the odds didn't look very good for the mentors assigned to the District 12 tributes. The mentors assigned tribute was also a reflection of the mentor's status among their peers, in the school and in the standing of the mentor's family in the greater capital social ladder. The wealthier families could always pay to ensure that their child got the most promising of the tributes. Hello, capitalism. While those who were assigned the weaker tributes took this as a slight against both themselves and the rest of their family. You know, this was real polite society type of shit. So Coriolanus took his assignment to the District 12 girl to be a nasty insult to the Snow family at large, especially since his father was so vehemently pro-capital and nationalistic. Already, Snow felt that the odds were not in his favor. Still, he made the most of it. He made the most of his time as mentor and used his charm to win over the hearts of many and better his own chances at succeeding. It worked like a charm. But I really think a lot of Snow's success in the 10th Hunger Games was due to his tribute. The 16-year-old musician girl named Lucy Gray Baird, and her whole history of putting on performances. Right off the bat, Lucy Gray Baird was a very unusual girl. When the reaping happens, meaning when the tributes are selected, the District 12 tributes are selected first, starting with the girl, and then with the boy, and then the process continues with the other districts in decreasing numerical order. So Lucy Gray Baird was selected first, and the literal first thing she does is pull a snake out of her pocket and put it down some girl's dress, causing a commotion in the crowd. Well, the girl she targeted happened to be the mayor's daughter, and the reason why she was targeted is revealed during the last third of the book, which I believe I mentioned somewhere else in this video. Or I'll mention it right now. The mayor's daughter was the object of affection for Lucy Gray's ex-boyfriend, and so the game was rigged to choose Lucy Gray's name for the Hunger Games as an attempt to get rid of her. But spoiler alert, that didn't really happen. Once Lucy Gray got onto the stage, she breaks out into song and gives an improv concert with the rebellious song against the Capitol and the grim reality of the Hunger Games. It caused a commotion among the Capitol and began to bring some of the spotlight onto Coriolanus Snow. And this is the beginning of Snow's strategy to win over the hearts of supporters, even if he didn't realize it at this point. But it's really not because he wants to save Lucy Gray's life, but it's because he wants to secure his own future. I saw this pattern of Snow's behavior pop up many times. Snow is like the Machiavellian character in that he hides what he is thinking from his enemies and most other people, and always tries to use people and things around him to pursue his own goals, even if that means he has to sacrifice those who are close to him. And so he initially viewed Lucy Gray as a workhorse of sorts to get him where he needs to go. Excuse me. And right up to the end of the Hunger Games and beyond, he's seen Lucy Gray as not much more than an object a trophy to collect, a checkbox to mark off on his path to greater excellence. I bring up the part where Snow acts like a Snow and goes above and beyond what is expected of him to secure his own future. He is literally the only mentor who goes out of his way to meet his tribute when the tributes first arrive to the capital via train. Well, I say train, it's actually via like boxcars, like they're just shoved into boxcars like animals, and then they're just flung out of the train onto the platform when they get here. But anyway, Snow doesn't come empty-handed, too. He brings with him a rose as a little gift to Lucy Gray. Again, he is the only mentor who goes out and meets with his tribute at the train station before he is scheduled to formally, officially meet her. Already, he's trying to gain her trust. Not because he sees her as a friend or an equal, oh hell no. But because she is a tool that he could use to propel his own future. Now here's where it gets kind of fucky and speaks to Snow's character development. As Snow not only visits Lucy Gray at the train station, but he insists on walking her back to her dorm or wherever the capital is going to keep the tributes. Well, it's not a house, nor is it an apartment or a hotel room. It's a freaking zoo. A literal human zoo. You heard that correct. The capital literally dumped the tributes and Snow into a cage excuse me, into a cage for the public to gawk at, like they're looking at monkeys or other animals at a zoo. And you have TV camera crews all over the place, and you know who else is also there? Coriolanus Snow, who is the heir of one of the wealthiest, most elite capital families, even if it was in the past, mucking around with the animals. That was what was going through Snow's head at the time, while the cameras had their eyes on him. He could try to run away and call out the walls when he exit, but that would only make him look even worse and be the laughingstock of the capital. Even worse, I'll make the entire Snow lineage the laughingstock of Panem. So here is where Lucy Gray starts affecting him in a positive way. Lucy Gray is no stranger to performances. She used to be part of a traveling singing and performing group, so she knows how to act in front of the cameras and win the hearts of viewers, which is what she tells Snow to do. She says to own it, to roll with the punches and play along with the whole act. And he does, setting the pathway to becoming the most popular mentor tribute pair in the 10th games. You can think of it as an entire, if you're familiar with the Hunger Games trilogy, you can think of it as an entire 180-degree turn from the Haymitch-Katniss mentor tribute relationship. Now, I thought for sure that spending time with Lucy Gray and hearing about her life in destitute District 12 would give some empathy to Snow, leading up to and during the games, and ultimately result in Snow trying to save Lucy Gray and to work to abolish the games, or at least show more humanity to the districts. It actually did none of that. Besides saving Lucy Gray for the wrong reasons, Suzanne Collins, the author, did a nice job of subverting my expectations. You can find more about Snow's character by comparing him to foils, which are other characters who show traits that are the opposite of Snow's. One such character is Sejanus Plinth, Snow's friend, quotation marks, friend, and classmate. I'll talk more about Sejanus and some of the other classmates later, but for now, Sejanus was extremely empathetic towards the tributes and horrified at Dr. Gaul in the games in a way that was very absent in Snow. Snow viewed the games as a means to get ahead in his life, and that never changes, but Sejanus saw it for what it really was, a bloodbath. Many of the other mentors and Snow saw their tributes as racehorses, meant to bet on and to work real hard for their masters. But Sejanus thought of his tribute as a long-lost friend who came into the world the worst kind of bad luck. Sejanus cares deeply for his tribute, not in a romantic way, but more like in a brotherhood type of way. But this is completely absent in Snow. Snow's attitude towards Lucy Gray shifts somewhat, which made me think that Lucy Gray would be the catalyst for Snow to reevaluate the value of the Hunger Games. Snow starts off with seeing Lucy Gray at a workhouse, a means to an end, and they come closer to the Hunger Games. And as they become closer, they open up, they talk to each other, and they endure a violent bombing attack when they visited the chosen arena together. And all throughout these events, they started bonding deeply. Snow was beginning to see her in a more romantic light at this point, even fantasizing and planning about making it official once she won the Hunger Games and marrying her. But it was never about Lucy Gray. It wasn't really about making Lucy Gray happy. The strength of the third-person limited narration comes into play here. Collins purposely frames the narratives around Snow's mindset, his way of thinking. He thinks about the potential relationship with Lucy Gray as another checkbox to mark off. He's got the money in the Plinth Prize, he's got the best education in the capital, he's going to the academy, and if he gets the Plinth Prize, he's going to the university. He's got the fame with having a tribute win the Hunger Games. He's got the girl, and he's got the bright future that he always wanted just ahead of him. It was never about making Lucy Gray happy or building a life and future together. It was always about securing what he wanted the most. I think at one point Lucy Gray realized what kind of person Snow was. We never find out exactly what Lucy Gray thinks about the capital, but we can make an estimation. Remember that Lucy Gray was from District 12 and was selected in a rigged process to be sent to the games and placed inside a literal human zoo for holding. I can't imagine that she had a high opinion of Snow or any other mentor. To her, it seemed most likely that nobody could be trusted. And maybe she knew that deep down all along, which made it a little unsettling when she got closer to Snow and entered in an uneasy dating relationship with him. He thought it was a dating relationship, and she could have just played along to go through with it. We call this, I don't know if this would be called a fawn traumatic response, but she's compliant. After all, Snow cheated by training a bunch of Dr. Gall's neon snakes to represent Lucy Gray's scent, and thus not attack her when the snakes were launched into the arena. That ultimately caused Snow to be placed in District 12 as a peacekeeper for a summer, where he could meet up with Lucy Gray away from the capital. I think Lucy Gray was searching for a way out in the beginning. She never trusted Snow to begin with. He was from the capital, and he was every bit as bad as the people forcing the games to happen. So she plotted to escape over months and made a weird move of including Snow in on her escape plan. It could have been that she wanted to earn his trust so that he didn't suspect her of betraying him and thus act to keep her in prison. Up to and including the Hunger Games, Lucy Gray performed as a fight for survival. She put on this act to survive. And now she puts on another act as a fight for freedom. And it worked. She succeeded in getting away from Snow and Panem. She and Snow fled from District 12 in the wee hours of the day, the wee hours of the morning, and they took up temporary residence in an abandoned wooden house miles away from the district. There, Snow stayed behind and waited for Lucy Gray to come back with some Katniss, which is a plant, it's a root. But she never did. By Snow's account, Lucy Gray vanished in broad daylight, never to be seen again. Now, there was some build up to this point. You see, Snow accidentally admitted that he had killed 3 people in relation to the games. Lucy Gray knew about the first 2. One was another tribute in the games. And I'll mention this a little bit later of how Snow even got into the arena. And the second one was the District 12's mayor's daughter, the same girl that Lucy Gray put the snake down her dress. The first could be argued as an act of self-defense, and the second would be to protect Lucy Gray from having the mayor's daughter tell the mayor how Lucy Gray entertained rebel ideas. You see, the mayor's daughter eavesdropped on a conversation between Lucy Gray and Snow and Sejanus, a couple other rebels, including Lucy Gray's ex-boyfriend, and of course the rebels didn't want her just snitching on them to the mayor, so Snow shot and killed her. But who was the third person Snow killed? Well, Snow tried to make up for the slip by saying that he had killed the old Snow, metaphorically. But Lucy Gray knew better. The third person that Snow got killed was his best friend, Sejanus Plinth. I'll go into more detail later about the circumstances of Plinth's death, but I just wanted to include here that Snow indirectly caused Plinth's death in a patriotic act for the capital that would ultimately put his name in good standing, as far as the capital is concerned. And that fits with Snow's Machiavellian character. As I've said before, he's willing to sacrifice those that are close to him in order to get ahead in some fashion. Well, that was the last straw for Lucy Gray. She knew that Snow and the rest of Panem couldn't be trusted, so she vanished. Just like the girl in the song and her name references, and you can look that up. I believe it's Lucy Gray Ballad. I'll put the link in the description if I could find the song. If there is a song to reference. But anyway. An important thing to note is that mockingjays exist in Panem at this point in time. They are a hybrid species of the jabberjays, which are a genetically engineered breed of birds that can record and recite entire conversations on command, and in mockingbirds. The resultant mockingjays cannot record and recite human speech, but they can mimic song tunes perfectly. Lucy Gray disappeared in a storm of mockingjays repeating her song ad nauseum, which I believe haunted Snow for decades until Katniss arrives with her title of Mockingjay that defies the capital. I wonder if during the Hunger Games trilogy that Snow was reminded of Lucy Gray when he heard Katniss being referred to as the Mockingjay. I gotta go back and I gotta watch this trilogy again and just look for Snow's reaction. Unfortunately, he doesn't get that much screen time in the movie, so I don't think I'll find too much. Alright, so I wanted to move on from talking about Lucy Gray, now to talk about the mentors of the 10th annual Hunger Games. Unlike in the Hunger Games trilogy, the mentors for the 10th Games were chosen from the pool of top-performing students at the capital's most prestigious high school, the Academy. Each student was assigned one tribute, for a total of 24 mentors and 24 tributes. And whichever tribute won the games, well, their mentor would win a free ride scholarship to the university, which is the capital's most prestigious college. And with that comes a very bright and very successful future, because now whoever wins, the mentor gets their foot in the door of future endeavors and, power and politics and all of that. So the mentors were all about 17 or 18-year-old high school students who still remember the Civil War and the aftermath. Some of them even lost parents. Others had to sacrifice a lot of their wealth, a lot of their comfort to even survive, and others still have witnessed horrors like cannibalism on the streets of the capital. Consequently, many of the mentors have fostered hatred for the district rebels, for the districts, and for the tributes, simply because they come from the districts. Thus, many mentors didn't really care if their tributes died or not, or were treated with decency and respect leading up to the games. At least at first. It wasn't until the Plinth Prize free ride scholarship was on the table that many of these mentors reconsidered their position in the games. So most of the mentors invested time and energy in their tributes for the wrong reasons. That is, they were focused solely on their gains from their tribute becoming victor. Some mentors were interested in winning, but still had pity for their tributes and wished that they didn't have to take part in the games. But the most radical of them all was Sejanus Plinth, and with good reason. For starters, Plinth wasn't born in the capital. He and his family were originally from District 2, and his father got into the business of munitions during the war and made a large enough fortune supplying weapons and bullets and guns and all that so that he could move his whole family out of District 2 and into the capital. And then that way he could spare Sejanus from being among the pool of children chosen for the Hunger Games. This fact has caused a lot of social problems for not only Sejanus, but for his parents as well. You see, the Plinths weren't liked in the districts because of all the money that they made that rescued them from the Hunger Games. And they weren't liked in the capital because they originally were from District 2. You see, there's this social war and stigma placed on people based upon the location of their birth. It feeds into this divide of capital versus district, which I guess another way you could say it, it's us versus them argument. And in this case, your worth, your status, is determined on where you fall in the balance. The Plinths weren't liked by anybody, which made Sejanus a pariah in his school. Furthermore, Sejanus' tribute was a boy from District 2, Marcus, whom Sejanus knew before he and his family moved to the capital. Multiple times, Sejanus spoke out directly against the Hunger Games and the war and refused to take part in it. While his father was wealthy and influential enough to secure him a mentorship spot, and Sejanus wished he hadn't. So this leads into a lot of disagreements between Sejanus and his father over the Hunger Games and over this whole social game where his father, Mr. Plinth, let's call him, had so much money that he could just bail Sejanus out of any trouble that he found with either the law, speaking out against the Hunger Games, protesting against the Hunger Games, or even in school. He could just throw some money to build a new gymnasium or a new research center for his school, and then bail Sejanus out of whatever trouble he was in. But we'll see later that there is one scenario where he couldn't do that. But I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Right, but it all came to a fever pitch when Marcus was killed during the games, and Sejanus took his seat from where he was sitting and watching the game. He and the mentors were sitting on these seats, and they were just watching everything unfold on a screen. Well, Sejanus just took his seat, and he flung it at the screen where the mentors watched the games unfold. It was easily dismissed as a weird outburst until something even stranger happened a little while later. Sejanus actually snuck his way into the arena. Now, the arena here in the 10th games, it wasn't anything like the arena in the trilogy. The arena in the trilogy is in this nondescript place. I believe the second book, Catching Fire, it was actually in a dome somewhere. But in here, in the 10th Hunger Games, the arena was actually this abandoned sports arena somewhere in the capital. Again, a nondescript place in the capital. But it was this former entertainment center that kind of fell apart when the war happened, and it just fell into disrepair. The capital citizens didn't even bother cleaning it up. So the public knew where this arena was, and it wasn't heavily guarded or anything like that, so people could sneak in and do whatever they want. So that's what Sejanus did. And he did this also late at night, where there were cameras about, but the cameras couldn't pick up anything that was happening at night, so of course he had some good cover. And this actually helped him out, this night cover, because not many people knew about the incident, so his classmates didn't really know about the incident. Still, Snow was chosen to go into the arena and talk some sense into Plinth and get him out of there. All the while, Snow could not understand why Sejanus would put himself into harm's way for a district boy. But the reason was pretty simple. Sejanus followed a custom in District 2 to sprinkle breadcrumbs over a deceased body as a way to give him a snack on their journey to the afterlife. So this was the cultural belief in District 2. So that's what Sejanus does as a final act of respect to Marcus. Of course, none of the other tributes, even the more mild-mannered of them, would even think about doing anything of what Sejanus did for even 2 seconds. So this act of kindness and respect for someone that they perceived to be an enemy, someone from the districts, they're not part of us, they're part of them, they're part of that group. This act of kindness was completely lost on the other mentors. Later on, both Sejanus and Snow enter the Peacekeepers Corps and are assigned to District 12. After the war, rebel sentiments survived among some of the residents of District 12, and eventually Sejanus became among them. He planned with the rebels a way to escape District 12 and find freedom somewhere north, somewhere in formerly known as Canada. Eventually that became his downfall. Snow had looked out for Sejanus, tried keeping him out of trouble with all these outbursts, with all these, disagreements with Dr. Gall, and disagreements with the Hunger Games, and all this. But in the end, it was actually Snow who betrayed Sejanus by secretly recording Sejanus' rebel plans via Jabberjay, and then sending that recording over to Dr. Gall. So sometime later, Sejanus was rounded up and executed by hanging in front of Snow and all of District 12 for treason against the capital, and Snow knew it was his fault. Sejanus was an adult at this time, so he was 18, and so his father simply couldn't just buy his son's way out of the punishment. And considering that Snow's Machiavellian habits and way of thinking, it was surprising to me that Snow genuinely felt remorse and shame for sending that Jabberjay over to the capital and snitching on his own friend. Like I said, the narration style, the point of view, it's third person limited, but the narration is framed around Snow's mindset, Coriolanus' mindset and his thoughts, and just by reading the narration, you can find out that Snow actually he didn't think that Dr. Gall would actually listen to the Jabberjay, but she did, and now he has to live with it. He has to live with the outcome of his decisions. But of course, I think this grief was short-lived, or at least he got over it pretty damn quick, because the Plinths had no other children. Sejanus was their only child, and so the Plinths needed an heir for their fortune. So they named Coriolanus their heir, and thus the inheritor of all their fortunes, which helped propel Snow right to the top of the political arena. And with that, the last of the humanity known in the capital was snuffed out by an act of betrayal. And that last bastion of humanity was Sejanus Plinth. Right, so I talked about this a little bit before, but now I want to talk more specifically about this idea of capital versus district. So the war helped to solidify a social rift between the citizens of the capital and everybody else in Panem. And this is shown through Coriolanus' efforts to make his tribute, Lucy Gray, more appealing to the capital citizens, and thus win the odds in her favor of winning the entire games. So just recall that the whole betting thing for the Hunger Games, that was alive in the 10th Hunger Games, where wealthy capital citizens could spend money and buy food for their tribute of choice. And of course, the more you give your tribute food, the better chances that they'll actually survive the game. Okay, so we know that Coriolanus' real motivations for trying to keep Lucy Gray alive. But it worked. He kept touting her as more capital, quotes, more capital, than, quotes, more district. Did you hear that? He wanted to make Lucy Gray appear more capital than more district. In the capital, the people living in the districts were stigmatized as dirty, violent, untrustworthy, poor, and less intelligent than their capital counterparts. A lot of these sentiments are remnants of war where it was the capital versus the rebels of the districts. A lot of casualties were suffered on both sides, and despite the dazzling wealth of the capital that we see in the trilogy, many of the capital citizens were struggling to survive in the first decade post-war. So reading this book has made me think that the capital immediately after the war was completely different than the post-apocalyptic dystopian wealthy city that we see in the trilogy. The mentors, which are Coriolanus' classmates, also witnessed the horrors of war. Many of them lost relatives, including parents, and others have seen acts of cannibalism, survived through starvation and sickness when the capital government couldn't help them. So the aftermath of the war left an impression on these mentors and much of the capital population that conditioned them to perpetually view the districts as the enemy. And the counter games certainly don't help this at all because it reinforces the war. It reinforces the us versus them concept. Not that there's anything wrong with men. The us versus them mindset where the children of the enemy are being killed to punish the capital's enemy. It goes without saying that the districts hate the capital for similar reasons relevant to the war. And now that the capital is reaping their children annually to kill them for sport, well, yeah, of course the districts would harbor hatred for the capital. I think that's very fair to say. Coriolanus was very aware of the distinction between capital and district. In the capital, identifying yourself as capital was a statement of pride for your country, while identifying others as district was demonizing them. So Coriolanus towed the line and tried to advertise his tribute, Lucy Gray, who came from District 12, as not being district, but capital. She is a capital-born woman, or young woman. It's like saying to the people of the capital that Lucy Gray is one of them. She is capital-born. She is just as talented, smart, charming, completely unlike the animals from the districts. I mean, hell, when the districts were even rounded up, as I've said a while ago, where did they go? Did they go into a hotel room? No, they didn't do any of that. They literally were hauled off and dumped inside of a cage as part of a human zoo. So of course the capital citizens thought of the district's children as animals. But all of this was to garner sympathy, meaning Coriolanus' efforts. It was all to garner sympathy from the capital citizens so that they could spend money on food to send to Lucy Gray and thus increase Coriolanus' chances of winning the Plinth Prize and a free ride to his bright future. So do not get it twisted, do not get it confused. Coriolanus was, I guess in a way, he did want to save Lucy Gray, but not for the right reasons. He wanted to get his foot in the door so he could become president of Panem, and if Lucy Gray survives, not only he gets that, but he also gets the girl. Simple as that. The capital citizens were very easy to influence if you knew how to play the game. We saw this in the trilogy with how Peeta and Haymitch worked together to create a narrative of Katniss being pregnant with Peeta's baby, all to garner sympathy from the capital citizens and take away public support from the games. The capital citizens were shallow at best. I understand after the war why they still harbored hatred for the districts, but over 70 years after the war during Katniss's time, I think the culture of the capital spiraled into degeneracy. I've talked about how Sejanus met his end before by the betrayal of his closest friend. But now I want to expand on that by pointing to a very obvious parallel between the betrayal of a Snow to their best friend. When Coriolanus' father, Cassius Snow, was in the academy as a student, both he and Casca Highbottom, who's the future dean of the school, studied under Dr. Gall. One day, Dr. Gall gave them an assignment that paired students off and told them to think of a punishment so cruel and so severe that their enemies would never forget how much they wronged the capital. So Casca and Cassius get drunk, and they think about it. And during this session, Casca comes up with the blueprint of the Hunger Games. Now, Casca wasn't serious about this whole thing. He thought of it as an inside joke between himself and his best friend. But Cassius had other plans and drafted the idea of the Hunger Games and submitted it to Dr. Gall. In this way, Cassius has betrayed Casca's trust, set him up to be the creator of the Hunger Games and thus responsible for all the violence therein. And the two had a falling out. They both got a good grade on the assignment, though. And history has a way of repeating itself. I said before how Sejanus sided with the rebels and came up with a plan that he then shared with Coriolanus. At this time, Coriolanus knew about the Jabberjays' ability to record entire conversations on command and play them back because these Jabberjays were originally designed to spy on the rebels and provide this information to the capital during the war. So while Sejanus told Snow about the rebel plans, Snow recorded everything via Jabberjay and sent it to Dr. Gall. Now, Coriolanus later thought that he didn't think that Alright, so I said before how Sejanus sided with the rebels and came up with a plan that he then shared with Coriolanus. At this time, Coriolanus knew about the Jabberjays' ability to record entire conversations on command and play them back because these Jabberjays were originally designed to spy on the rebels and provide information about the rebels' plan of attack to the capital during the war. So while Sejanus told Snow about the rebel plans, Snow recorded everything and sent it to Dr. Gall. But Coriolanus later thought that he didn't actually think that Dr. Gall was gonna listen to the Jabberjay recording, or at least that was his coping mechanism, in my opinion. I think he was trying to. He kept repeating it to himself over and over and over again. No, she's not really gonna listen to it. No, she's not really gonna take a look at it. And I think he was trying to do that to soothe himself for his betrayal. But I also thought his relationship with Sejanus was very conflicting at times. Like I said, many people didn't like Sejanus and the Plinths because they're from districts. Coriolanus also didn't like him. Sejanus is considered new money and the Snows are old money, and there's a lot of strife there. And over time, I guess Snow got a little bit more acquainted with Sejanus, a little bit closer. I thought that Snow really thought of Sejanus as an enemy through and through. Wasn't actually going to help him out in any way. And this kind of threw me for kind of a bit of a loop, his thought pattern here. But I think it's because he's trying to smooth things over with himself. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, Dr. Gall actually did listen to the Jabberjay recordings, which led to Sejanus being rounded up and killed. Then Snow reaped the benefits by inheriting the fortune that was meant for Sejanus and securing his future in a roundabout way. Again, as Snow betrayed his close friend for his own benefit. And it doesn't end there. From the get-go, Casca and Coriolanus never had a friendly relationship. Casca still had a grudge against Crassius, which spilled over into his son. And eventually Coriolanus caught wind of Casca's weakness, morphling. Over time, Casca became addicted to taking morphling, which is a powerful painkiller that helped him cope with the horrors he had created when he thought up the Hunger Games. So Snow used this to his advantage and put a few drops of rat poison into the bottle of morphling that killed Casca. Which is interesting because if you remember one little detail in the Hunger Games trilogy, the books, which was sort of touched on in the movies, is that there's a reason why President Snow always smelled like roses. And that reason was to cover up the stench of blood. Snow had sores in his mouth. These were chronic sores that would never go away. And I believe it was because he had to ingest rat poison at some point during his political career because he was accused of poisoning one of his enemies. And he was accused of poisoning his enemies via drink. And so to prove his innocence, that he didn't do it, he actually drank some of the poisoned wine or whatever it was himself. Which it didn't kill him, but it caused him to develop these chronic bloody sores in his mouth that would never go away. And so he always had to contend with the smell of blood coming from his mouth. And so he perfumes himself to smell like roses. But what's interesting is that the movie, there's this one scene, I forget which movie it was, where Snow takes a drink of like champagne at some Capitol party, but then he kind of spits it back out into the glass, and along with the champagne comes blood. Which hints to it. The movie doesn't go too much in depth to it. You find out more, I think, in Mockingjay. I think it was part 2, where Snow is actively coughing up blood into a napkin. But it all goes back to this. I think when he poisons Casca, I think that's when Snow got that idea of using rat poison to dispose of anybody who's in his way for a political gain. You know, there's a saying that was repeated throughout this book. A saying that became a little war cry for the Snow family during and after the war. And it goes like this: Snow lands on top. I think I've talked enough about this book. This is the story of the rise of the future President Coriolanus Snow and some of the events that set him on the path to securing power in Panem. It also introduced the origins of many features of the Hunger Games in the trilogy book series, such as the mentorship program, the Victor's Village, the banning and delivery of sponsor gifts, and the rule that the districts were forced to watch every minute of their Hunger Games. It also became the origin story of the Hanging Tree song, which was echoed by the rebels during Katniss' time, even if the modern-day people of Panem forgot who created it. This book highlighted a lot of firsts and origins for the Hunger Games, so I recommend it if you loved the first book series. Did you know that they're coming out for a movie for it? As of writing this script and uploading this video, the movie is slated to come out in November of 2023. I love this story as a whole. There were a lot of twists and turns that surprised me in the end, such as the lack of change in Coriolanus' Machiavellian type of character. He wasn't a hero, nor was he a villain, even if he did some scummy things like betraying his closest friend, or, killing the dean of the school. A lot of Coriolanus' motivation is doing the things he did to restore the Snow family name to its former prosperity and to provide a future for his remaining family, which would be his grandmother and his cousin Tigress. He's lived through the war. He's seen the horrors it caused in the capital, such as losing his father and seeing someone literally cut off the leg of a dead maid in the middle of the street, a capital street, to be cooked for a meal. He also witnessed Dr. Gall's neon snakes bite one of his classmates and turn her into a scaly, which is a human lizard thing. There were also times where I questioned if the Capitol was legitimately on Coriolanus' side and wanted to protect him, or if they viewed Coriolanus as a potential enemy, and they needed to put him through test after test to measure his loyalty to Panem. Did the Capitol want to protect him or kill him? Even Dr. Gall treated Coriolanus as a type of project. She saw some potential in him to be a great leader for Panem, and probably saw the potential in his father as well. So she meddled with some strings backstage and set many of the events in motion that would set Coriolanus on the path that he was destined for. I think that Dr. Gall represents the inhumanity of the Hunger Games. In other words, if the Hunger Games sporting event was a human person, if it actually had a personification, Dr. Gall would be it. She created these hybrid mutants by amputating entire limbs off of people and replacing them with parts from animals, and created the neon snakes that turned people into scalies and sent them in the arena to kill. Honestly, if you were turned into a scaly after being bitten by the snake, that's actually the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that you die from an awful death. But aside from it, and Dr. Gall toyed with Coriolanus multiple times, haunting him with vague threats of death, and sending him on a little excursion in the District 12 for a summer to help mold him into our model student. So Dr. Gall did not create the Hunger Games, but I credit her with helping to perpetuate and even escalate them into the glorious monstrosity we see in the trilogy books. If you were in the Hunger Games, what would be the first thing you do? Right, so how would you even strategize your way to victory? See, I'm the type of person who doesn't make a whole lot of noise, so I just hide until everyone died, or I died from the elements, disease, or lack of food. So that's it for February's entry of A Cowboy Reads. I'm a bit behind on my schedule, but I've already read March's entry. So I'll get on the script for that real soon and have that up when I can. Until then, cheers!